Cool. Well, thank you very much. It was very much. I'm actually going to be in London randomly for other reasons, and why not come and speak again at 44Con? So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I also appreciate actually a reasonable number of people come back for it because, of course, it is pretty late at night. My talk is missed opportunities. As alluded to, it used to have a more racy title, which I decided I probably shouldn't put in print necessarily. It was something to the effect of like, I bloody told you to fix this. But obviously with asterisks over bloody, because that's a bit racy for this kind of audience, I'm sure. Anyway, so if you don't know who I am, I'm James. I work in Project Zero at Google. And Project Zero has sort of a mission statement / motto, which is making zero-day hard. And what this actually means in practice is a lot of things. Like one of the things we do quite on a regular basis is hardcore reverse engineering and research on finding security vulnerabilities, and then giving vendors such as Microsoft a deadline of how long they're allowed to have before they must patch it. Otherwise, that information goes public. So, of course, in our case, we give them 90 days. And if something isn't fixed after 90 days, well, that information goes public. And, of course, that applies to lots of aspects of this because, of course, fixing some bugs are more difficult than others. If you're fixing sort of a memory corruption, it might be relatively easy to do. But if you're trying to fix some sort of design-level flaw, well, that's a bit more of a challenge. But we took the pragmatic approach that you're just going to get 90 days for everything. You're not going to have an exception for anything a bit more technically complicated because that vulnerability might be being used in the wild to attack actual people. Because Project Zero came out of the sort of Aurora incident where Google was hacked by the allegedly Chinese. I think it was pretty much confirmed that it was the Chinese. And that angered enough people that we were able to say, hey, are you willing to fund a team to just go and try and shut down some of these vulnerabilities? And it will only cost like, I don't know, a few million a year or something like that. Nothing major. And for Google's bottom line, it is nothing major, right? Unfortunately, as diligent as we are at doing things like research or maybe talking to policy people, things like that, in the wild still exists. Like, 0 days are still being used to attack real people in the wild, and seemingly, like, if you read the blog post for threat analysis group, it seems to be getting worse, not better, somehow. While we're doing the sort of research side of things, the sort of offensive security research side of things, the Google Threat Analysis Group are actually trying to find 0 days in the wild. And then when they find these 0 days in the wild, they, of course, try to get them fixed as quickly as possible to try and mitigate those. And, of course, sometimes you find Microsoft stuff. They've been finding a lot of Apple stuff recently. And it works, but it's still kind of suboptimal because, ideally, these bugs shouldn't exist in the first place. But something which caught my eye was this bug. So this was an in-the-wild bug, actually found by Tag, but also independently found by CrowdStrike. And this is actually just some screenshots of CrowdStrike's blog post detailing the sort of behavior of this in-the-wild exploit. And I spoke to the Tag team, and like they told me what the bug was. It's like, that sounds awfully familiar. And it was. It turned out to be, it was definitely very familiar. Even though like this blog post is all about CrowdStrike, it turns out Tag just never wrote a blog post about it. But if you go and look at the acknowledgements for that bug, you can see that my colleague Maddie, or ex-colleague Maddie, she used to be in Project Zero, now in Tag, and Vlad found it and reported it to Microsoft and get it fixed within 7 days. So this bug is now fixed, which is nice. So why do I say this looked familiar? Well, like to a certain degree, a lot of bugs look very familiar in the world. Like there's only so many types of bug classes, but this one kind of hit a bit harder than most. So let's rewind the clock back to sort of 2014, 2015. I was spending time looking at like trying to find new research project, and I came on the idea of like how do I apply sort of classic symbolic link attacks that you would find, say, on a Unix system to Windows? And there'd been a little bit of research around this before, but I thought, no, I need to do like a proper a treatise on it, like actually do the full research, try and find all the sort of edge cases, interesting behaviors associated with symbolic link attacks. So I did this presentation at Infiltrate in 2015, so quite early in 2015. The research was from 2014. I'd submitted various bugs as well, and Microsoft had fixed those bugs, where you actually found like an actual exploit, a security vulnerability itself. I also released some tooling. So these tools I released under the Project Zero banner on our GitHub, and it basically were simple tooling to demonstrate all the different sort of attacks that I'd come up with. So, for example, like there's a clever trick to get symbolic links working on Windows, for example, and there's also like bait and switch, which allows you to do sort of time attack, time and use attacks through symbolic link attacks. So people actually took this on board, and over the years, people have actually made actual money using these tools to exploit symbolic link attacks on Windows. So that's actually a good outcome from doing that. And that's kind of what Project Zero is here to do. It's not just teaching you how to do stuff, but also trying to like provide resources for other people to find more bugs, because there is only a finite number of Project Zero researchers, even fewer who look at Windows specifically or Microsoft products specifically. So you need some multiplication effect, like you need other people to help you out and try and find bugs. Now, of course, unfortunately, that also means that the nominal bad people are also potentially listening and finding new and interesting behaviors that we disclose, and there's unfortunately not much we can do about that. So for people who don't actually know what I'm really meaning when I'm talking about a sort of classic symbolic link attack, imagine you have some sort of privileged service, and this privileged service obviously is running, like in a Unix system, it may be running as root, but on Windows it'd be running, say, as system, and it's there to perform some sort of user operation. Now, what a normal user can do is they can create various different types of symbolic link. One of them is something called a mount point, and a mount point allows you to redirect the opening of a directory on the file system to any other directory on that file system. You can't directly redirect files. You can on Windows, but you need like an additional privilege, which normal users wouldn't normally have. So actually, this is one of your only file system symbolic link primitives you're allowed to do. So the user goes, okay, I'm going to write mydir to the C drive, and that mydir directory is actually a symlink to, say, the system32 directory, which non-administrators can't normally modify, because this is like where all the main DLLs live. It's your main configuration information, all lives within this folder. So of course, that's restricted to only administrators. But what if that privileged service has a bug? It has sort of like an API which says, write to this particular file given this path, and you tell it, hey, can you write to mydir/file.dll? Like there might be some checks in there to say, okay, don't write to system32 because that would be bad. But no, we can write to mydir/file.dll. But because of that symbolic link, in the end, what the privileged service does is, as its administrative privilege, it writes to mydir, but that actually is a symlink to system32, and then it actually writes file.dll to system32 instead. And from there, you can potentially abuse that to get system privileges yourself. So it's classic sort of symbolic link attack, and Unix has various techniques to try and mitigate these attacks, but on Windows at the time, there really wasn't the sort of same level of mitigations. Now, when it comes to then fixing that bug, there's various approaches. You can make sure that you're just not exposing an API which says just write to some arbitrary file for me, because that's usually never a good idea anyway. But one of the sort of Windows-specific fixes is Windows supports something called impersonation. And the idea here is that a system service is allowed to pretend to be a different user on the system. So when that API call is made to write the file, the system service can go, okay, I will pretend to be you temporarily while I manipulate the file system. And the ultimate end result of that is that you can only do what you would normally be allowed to do as that user. So even though you're running as like a system user, which has full administrative privileges, you're effectively dropping your privileges temporarily for the period that you're executing that write file API. So the ultimate end goal is, sure, you can still write to mydir, you can still get it to follow that symlink, but when it tries to write to that file, because it's impersonating the user, it fails with an access denied error, because that's just how it worked. So a lot of the bugs that I'd reported were sort of in cases where it should have been trying to impersonate, but they forgot to do the impersonation, or there's some logical flaw that allows you to basically get the impersonation disabled before writing out the file to disk, and then you could get the symbolic link attack to work. But the trouble was, impersonation actually introduced a new type of symbolic link bug class, which I'll go into here. So since Windows XP, you've been allowed to have something called fast user switching. This allows you to log into the same computer multiple times with different users, and they all run concurrently. You can't share the desktop at the same time, but you can run multiple users at the same time. This is also the same technology used for terminal services. So if you have a terminal server somewhere on your network, it uses the same underlying technology, which allows you to do multiple users at the same time. But Windows NT was not really designed for this multi-user scenario. So originally, when it was designed, it had various locations in the system which were shared between any user who logged on, because in general, there was only the services and whoever was literally logged on to the desktop, and that's all that it needed to worry about. So that needed to change to support its multi-user profile architecture. Now, when you actually access a file on Windows, it's not quite as simple as just, oh, I just open a file on the file system and job done. In fact, there's sort of a secondary file system underneath your normal file system view. If you open Explorer, you see C:/something. Underneath that is actually something called the Object Manager. And the Object Manager is like a file system itself. But how NT represents drive letters in this scenario is it allows you to specify, say, C: as a special symbolic link, which points to the real location of the mounted volume. And this is a different type of symbolic link to what I've already talked about. This is Object Manager symbolic links, which is one of the fun things about all this symbolic link research. So in order to, say, for example, allow one user to map, say they want to map the Z drive to their network share, but another user logged on at the same time also wants to map the Z drive to their network share. You can't obviously share a common location for those two things. So XP introduced this per-user DOS device facility. When you try and open the file, it first prefixes that file path with a special /?. You may have seen this in other scenarios. It sometimes leaks out. It's kind of like an internal detail. It shouldn't leak out into the user space, but sometimes it does. But what that does is when the kernel tries to look up this location, it first checks this per-user location under sessions 0, DOS devices, and XY, which is usually like a unique identifier for the user. And it looks in that and goes, okay, is there a symlink called C: in there? And of course, as a normal user, that will be a no, because the user doesn't need to remap the C drive. The C drive is just a system construct. It has no bearing on the user. If they try to access the Z drive, yes, that should exist and that should be fine. But of course, the C drive shouldn't exist, right? So what the kernel does is it goes, well, I couldn't find it in your user directory, but I'm going to go and look at a global location. And this global location is accessed only by admin. Only admin can write to it. And in there, of course, is your system-level C drive, where all your system files are located. That's a symlink. It reads the location, say, /device/hard disk volume 1. The object manager then constructs the full path, and that's how you open that file. Great. And you may think, so what? That's fine, right? Sure. Why would this be a problem? Well, it's a problem because there's nothing actually stopping the user remapping the C drive. Even though I can't write to global ? I can write to my per-user DOS device directory. That's kind of the whole point. And because of the ordering of how it opens that location, it first looks at the per-user one before it sees the global one. So as a malicious user, I can, of course, redirect that C drive to somewhere else entirely. So I can redirect it, say, to the fake root directory on the same volume. And then any sort of access to the C drive is now actually not going to be looking up at the secured locations like System32. It's going to be whatever fake locations I drop on disk at the time. But yeah, okay, the user can remap their C drive. Probably horrible things will happen. Things will crash. So what? Who cares? Well, the problem is, I mentioned already that impersonation allows you to pretend to be that user. Well, it doesn't just apply to like their identity, but it also applies to their drive mappings. Because if you told a system service, hey, I want to open something on my Z drive, it needs to know where that Z drive is. So the object manager is going to go, okay, I'll actually follow that user's per user DOS device mappings and find out where your Z drive is. But that then comes in if you then impersonate the user in a system call, in a system service. If it tries to access anything on the C drive, I can just give it a completely fake path and just do whatever I want, right? And of course, if you're trying to load a library, which is supposedly in a secure location and shouldn't be compromised, well, I can get it to load a library anywhere I like. And then it's game over, right? Like I've got privilege escalation. I can get it to load a DLL into a system service, and I've got system privileges. So of course, I report this, right? Like I say, okay, Microsoft, this is a problem. I carefully say that it's not just DLLs. It could be anything you try and load while you are impersonating a user. So for example, like what if there's, say, configuration files on disk, and this configuration file had like an entry which said, spawn a new process or load this DLL. Well, you've kind of then got a level of indirection, but you only need to read the configuration file. It doesn't need to write to this secured location. So it applies to everything, right? So I submit this, give as much detail as I can, and wait, right? Because the reality of the research process is, certainly for big vendors like Microsoft, it's not just a case of, here's a patch, I can submit you a patch like you could say with the Linux kernel. You've got to go through the reporting process. So I sit there in my white coat, doing my security research. I then write my vulnerability report, of course, like fill in as much detail as I can, try and give them like, don't do this, like don't patch it this way because that would be stupid. That then gets reported to the vendor, so in this case, the Microsoft portal or the secure app mailing list, the mailing alias. And then it goes into what I call the black hole of Redmond. And at this point, I hear nothing back, right? I don't have any direct contact with the people who are likely to be fixing this issue because you send it to like a PM in the MSRC, and they're the ones which actually liaise with the development team to try and get this fixed. Now, 90 days later, in our case, and if I was submitting before I was in Project Zero, maybe 12 months later, who knows, right? If there's no deadline, they can take as long as they like. You might be lucky and you get an advisory and a patch, right? But of course, again, the black hole works against us here. They don't tell me necessarily what they fixed. And if anything, everything's worse these days because it used to be that a particular fix had a specific update in mind, and that update only had the changes necessary for that security vulnerability. Now you have like the sort of unified patches which have like every single CVE they're fixing that month, which could be like 30, 40, 50 CVEs in a wide variety of locations on the system. And you need to reverse engineer the patch from somewhere which you don't necessarily even know. Like if they fix the root cause, like the specific bug, then maybe you know where to look. But it may be like, oh, we fixed this thing over here, which ultimately fixes this bug. Who knows? So of course, I need to go back into my research process and go, okay, I understand what you're doing. I now understand your patch. And guess what? Like you may not have fixed it properly, right? So I looked at it, and this was the main change I found in the kernel. They'd actually done something more than I was expecting them to do. They actually changed the way in which you interacted with the kernel. So when you open a file on disk or open any resource in the object manager, you need to specify something called the object attributes. These object attributes contain the path, but also contains a set of flags, which sort of define various properties about the object you're trying to open. One of them is, for example, open this file path case-insensitively. Like, technically, Windows does support case-sensitive file names, and so you can say, actually, just ignore case when you're opening this file on disk. And they added a brand new flag for just this scenario. And this flag was ignore the impersonated device map. Okay, awesome, right? Like, that's fine. Like, okay, it's kind of opt-in, but that's fine. Like it's Microsoft do have a lot of app compat issues, so making it opt-in seems a reasonable approach. And if that flag is set, then it either takes the device map from the process token, the main process identity, which would in a service's case be the system, which will mean it won't use the impersonated device map, or it uses your impersonation token, depending on the setting of that flag. But it also, of course, had to add where this gets used. There's no point just adding that flag as an optional extra and then not using it. So in the DLL loader, they added this flag explicitly. There is sort of a get out flag, like a chicken bit, which says, hey, turn this feature off, but by default it's on. And that basically mitigates this DLL because it will always set this attribute, and then it will open the file with that attribute set. It'll ignore the impersonated device map. For normal users, that doesn't matter, but for system services, that fixed my bug, or specifically, it fixed my proof of concept. However, I could not find any other use case for this. So was it fixed? Well, of course not, right? Like, they didn't actually fix the root cause. They added the mechanism to maybe fix the root cause, but they only applied it specifically to the proof of concept that I submitted. And I'd already said things like files are there, but also, like, just creating a process, right? Like, if you create a process, it inherits the identity of the process creating it. So if you create a process from system, it will create a system-level process with admin privileges, etc. But, of course, if you're impersonating the user, it will follow the user's device map, and therefore you can redirect the C drive. So if it tries to spawn a process from the C drive in a secured location, an attacker can redirect that to any executable they like. So report number 2, right? Like, hey, you done fucked up the last time. Can you not fuck up this time? And I had high hopes. Maybe they'd listen to me, right? Yeah, no. They said, no, we can't be bothered. Like, we might fix it in another version of Windows, maybe. No, I'm not promising anything, right? So at this point, I go, whatever, don't care. I'm not gonna fight this. I've learned quite quickly that it's not worth actually fighting Microsoft. If they don't want to fix something, I'm happy to just put that information in the public domain and just let it be. So we fast forward 8 years, right? And it turns out that this CV 2023 36874, which Tag had found and CrowdStrike had found, and who knows who was actually exploiting it for privilege escalation. It was a bug in the Windows error reporting service. And what the exploit was doing was it first redirected the C drive for the user, then called the function to load a report in the Windows error reporting service. That then impersonated the user through various machinations. It ended up at create process for this were-manager.exe out of, say, system32. But of course, the attacker had redirected the C drive. So of course, what it actually created was were-manager.exe from the attacker's controlled fake root directory. But it had a system token, which gave it administrative privileges, and it basically compromised your system. And of course, this is exactly the bug that I reported to Microsoft eight and a bit years ago, and they didn't fix it, right? So I'm slightly annoyed, right? Like, that I've gone to all this effort, I've reported multiple bugs using this primitive, and in the wild exploit is using basically the exact bug that I told them to fix, 8+ years ago. Slightly maddening, right? But it's not the only in the wild which is using this exact same bug class of remapping the C drive. This blog post from Microsoft talking about knotweed was exploiting something called the activation context and the manifest files. Manifest files are like XML files they store on disk, which contain things like DLL redirection rules. And the idea is that, of course, you can't modify these manifest files. They may be installed when you install an application by the sort of privileged installer, but you can't modify them, you can't redirect them. But of course, it was impersonating while opening these files. And this is kind of the example of like, if you have a configuration file that you can redirect on the C drive, well, that also can be used as a privilege escalation. So again, like, this is also the exact same bug class that I reported that if they just fixed it 8 years ago, we wouldn't be having, right? So me and Maddie did a presentation at OffensiveCon this year talking about like some of the findings around this, because like Tag had found its use in the wild as well. And of course, like I thought, well, the only way to really drive this home, right, is to find they did various things to like actually like mitigate this bug. Like they added like a new feature which said, I'm going to apply that object attributes flag, the ignored device map flag, for manifest files. But it wasn't on by default. It was only on if you had a special mitigation on your process, and it only worked if you're in a system service, and they only turned it on for the print spooler, and so any other system service which would load a DLL during impersonation was similarly vulnerable. So okay, I thought I'll have a quick look, and it turns out that I knew exactly where to look because I'd reported a bug about 6 years ago which impacted COM and COM marshalling, but I exploited it using the bits service. And the bits service had a special function which basically would impersonate a user and then talk to COM. And I knew I could get this COM code to load an arbitrary DLL, use that to exploit the manifest bug, and get privilege escalation. So again, another bug that I'd reported, which abused this feature, that Microsoft had not properly fixed in that time. So yeah, I'm pretty mad. So I thought, time for an ultimatum, right? Again, I point out that I'm not specifically saying that this bit service needs to be fixed. You need to fix the root cause bug because it's being used in the wild multiple times. There's loads of people who are looking at this now. There are multiple people finding new bugs in this bug class. We really, really, really need to get this done. And my ultimatum basically was, like, look, Project Zero, like, is capable of, like, just deciding unilaterally that any more bugs that I find which abuse this bug class are no longer considered new security vulnerabilities. Everything that I would report in this case would be considered variants of the original one. And we have a variant policy that if you don't properly fix the bug or there is trivial variance for the bug that you reported and then they fixed, then they are not considered to be new bugs in that scenario, and therefore they do not grant themselves 90 extra days to fix it. So I said, look, you need to get this fixed, right? Otherwise, any bug I find is just going to be open to the public immediately, and you will get no protection whatsoever. So lo and behold, they finally fixed it. Or at least, maybe. As I said earlier, right? Like, they released this information. Like, if you go and look at this security advisory, if you can really call it that, from Microsoft, it gives you fuck all information in it, basically. Like, it's so poor. Like, Windows kernel, that at least is a good sign that they didn't just fix the bits service. But, like, it's nothing. Like, it gives you no useful information whatsoever. So eventually, like, I got round to looking at it. And what they'd done is they changed the object lookup process. And they checked the flag. Of course, they have to leave that now in for backwards compatibility in case some code actually calls this function. But it's actually kind of redundant because now it also calls this special function, use system device map, passing in the path that it's going to open. And if that path is trying to open this DOS device prefix, this /?, then it goes, okay, is it a drive path, and is the first letter the system root drive, which in general is the C drive? If it is, I return true. And if you return true, then it disables the impersonated device map. And this is like fixing the bug class. This literally fixes the bug class because all these features they added, like the extra mitigation in the side-by-side manifest stuff, which was being exploited by Knotweed, utterly pointless now. Like that flag, utterly pointless, because there's never a scenario where you even need to pass this flag to the kernel anymore, because it will generally do the right thing. Well, if you wanted to stop them, say, impersonating the D drive or the E drive, then you could still pass the flag. But actually abusing the system drive, which is going to be 99% of the cases, that's now fixed, right? So yeah, for those who want to keep score on these kind of things, like at least 3 in the wild exploits abuse this bug class. We don't know the exact figure. There's probably more that we don't know about. There's probably more that were reported and fixed by Microsoft that no one ever realized was abusing this bug class. But they tried many, many times to fix it. Like, they went to all the effort of changing the kernel API to try and fix this mitigation by having the opt-in mitigation flag. They added the new side-by-side assembly mitigation, which, as I say, ended up being completely worthless. They've done 10+ multiple point fixes for the individual bug instances of this, abusing this class, right? So think about it, right? I was told once by someone at Microsoft that a single patch for a single vulnerability in Windows, because due to the development effort, testing effort, deployment effort, costs around $1 million. So at the very least, there's about $13 million minimum sunk just into the fixing the bugs that we know about. Now think of all the other places that money's been wasted. They've spent all this money trying to mitigate it. No doubt all manner of like design level meetings and expensive engineers' time thinking about ways of mitigating this. All that gets taken into account. Then take into account outside of Microsoft, all the companies who've had to update their systems because of bugs using this bug class. All the people who potentially were impacted by the in-the-wild exploitation of this bug class. It could be easily past $100 million overall, probably a lot more, in the past 8.5 years, when instead they could have written 10 lines of code and they would have saved themselves all those millions of dollars. And obviously no one will ever call them out on that because there is no real number. It's just that's what it costs, right? So as just some sort of takeaways, like if you're a vendor, please fix design flaws. Like this was a design flaw. This was something which probably wasn't anticipated. Otherwise, there would have already been mitigations in place when I reported it. Now, I'm not saying that I was necessarily the first person to ever find this bug class, because probably there are some shady organizations who had found it before me. But honestly, like, if something is clearly a material threat, that you should really try and fix that at the root cause. And fine, do some point fixes first. Like, if you need to get this fixed quickly, like I say, like, you only get 90 days, well, fine. Fix those point fixes first. You can get those in under the 90-day deadline. But have a plan to actually fix that design flaw, and do not forget about it. Like, sure, they said they might fix it in a later version of Windows. It probably went into the general bug queue. Like, I've been told that if they say to you, we're not going to fix it now, but we will fix it in another version of Windows, it gets put into the general sort of issue tracker for Windows. Not even necessarily as like a security priority bug. So it really relies on someone going, hey, that's an interesting bug, I'll try and fix that, as opposed to being sort of prioritized for fixing. And no doubt that's the same in most vendors if you're doing these sort of things. So don't forget to actually fix it if you say you're going to fix it. If you're coming from the researcher side of things, if you can, keep pushing the vendor. Like, probably part of the reason that this bug class finally got fixed was more about the number of security vulnerabilities being reported to them which abuse this bug class. Like, the actual bug advisory that got fixed was actually credited to four different groups, because each one had submitted a different bug which abused this bug class, and this fix mitigated the entire bug class, and therefore everyone got fixed at the same time, rather than having to do 4 individual point fixes. But it's easy to just send the bug over to a vendor and just go, wash your hands of it, like I kind of did, and just say, I'm not going to force you to do it because I can't force you to do it. It goes into the black hole, right? It goes into the vendor's black hole, and I have no direct influence over their ability to patch or not to patch something. So that is all I wanted to talk about. I will have a gratuitous plug because I'm on stage, right? So buy my book. It's going to be coming next year, and I'm not going to be talking about doing symbolic link attacks. So it's been a wonderful book, I'm sure. Anyway, sorry for the gratuitous plug, but thanks very much for staying so late at night and listening to me complain about Microsoft, because everyone likes to complain about Microsoft. Thank you.